Welcome back to the second in a long series of videos about general biology. Um, in the last video, I ended saying I have no idea what's coming up next, and of course I should have known it's evolution, because evolution is central to discussing biology. So in this mini video, which will be significantly shorter than the last, we're going to discuss evolution and the traits that establish a unity among all of life. Evolution ties all of the traits ties everything together for biology. It's sort of the continuous theme throughout the entire course. Evolution we call it a theory because it has a lot of evidence to support it. It's got an enormous body of evidence to support it. It states broadly that organisms living on Earth today are the modified descendants of common ancestors. You are a descendant of your parents, and you are slightly different than they are. You may be better at some things than they are. You may have, I don't know, a better immune system than them, or a worse immune system. You are slightly different. On a large scale, over millions of years, you can see change occurring in the fossil record. And what's on the screen is one of my favorite ones to talk about, so I'm not going to talk for too long. Whale evolution is sort of a fun passion of mine, but okay, I'll give it to you real quick. So you got this small wolf-like animal called Pakicetus. And Pakicetus, top left corner there, would prowl in the woods and likely near marshes, hunting for prey. Over time, it became more semi-aquatic. It lived more and more in the water, and that was where it eventually took on this form that we know of as Ambulocetus. For Ambulocetus, the nostrils started to move up the snout a little, and you'll notice that its legs became more adapted to swimming in the water. It got a more flexible backbone in order to have that. Think of it as a more of a mammal-like swim. It moves its back up and down instead of like a reptile or a fish, left and right. And Ambulocetus, we think, was more of an ambush predator. It would lay there like an alligator or a crocodile with its snout right along the ground, feeling vibrations. Now, Ambulocetus didn't need much in the way of, say, being able to hear things because it could feel vibrations. It used its jaw, and in fact, you have that bone conductive ability too. You probably use it when you're sleeping or trying to sleep. You put your head on the pillow, and suddenly you hear like every vibration that's happening in the house magnified. That's basically what Ambulocetus did. And then as a prey would walk by, it would lunge, grab the prey, pull it into the water, and probably drown it. Ambulocetus, over time, spent more and more time in the water, a lot more like a hippo, as Rhodocetus. Rhodocetus, as you can see, over time, started losing its legs, became less and less useful. They were primarily used for moving through the water until you get Prototherium, and Prototherium's got almost vestigial legs. No longer can it go on the land at all, really. It just stays in the water, and it gets most of its propulsion through its broad, flattened tail. And then you see Adiocetus and Cetotherium, more and more and more modern whale-like in their structures. The nostrils over time progressed right up the nose to the top of the head, forming what we know of as a blowhole. And there we go. Over time, you went from this wolf-like structure all the way down to a whale through evolution. Sorry, I had to go into the whale. I really like it. Also, I love Sirenians, which are the manatees and the dugongs. I like them. I really like their evolutionary pathway. So if you ever want to talk, I'm here. There is a unity among biological organisms. Two species sharing certain traits. Now, that doesn't mean that they're related to each other. But oftentimes they may share these traits because they have a common ancestor. If you look at the screen, you can see the arm of a human, the forelimb of a dog, the wing of a bird, and the flipper of a whale. All of them have the same basic bone structure in common because they all are descended from the same basic tetrapodal organism. So we've got this unity of structure due to these relatives in our past. You can't talk about evolution without talking about Charles Darwin. Here he is with sort of the mean old man stare, sort of the get off my lawn look to him. Um, he really put forward this view in his book, The Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection, um, in which he put forward the idea that over time organisms change, um, and those changes are a result of the traits that they've inherited over time that are selected for. We're going to talk a lot about Charles Darwin in Bio 102 and the application of his treatise. But for now, I want to just give you the basics. There was this idea of descent with modification, that species arise from a succession of ancestors that were slightly different from them. Darwin never talked about evolution. I don't think it was mentioned at all in his book. He talked about descent with modification, that small differences over time build up in a population. And here on the left, you can see the evolution of the horse. The horse started off as a really small animal that you can't see. I'm motioning with my hand that they're about 2.5 feet tall, running through the forest. Um, they didn't have hooves at the time. They had paws, just like most animals do. And then, as the forest declined and the savanna or the grasslands increased, they got taller to see over the grasses. They didn't have to be small to maneuver between trees to escape predators. Now they could just be taller and bigger to run faster. So over time, the horses went from this small form to this very small, agile form to this large, fast form. What Darwin himself observed were that individuals in a population vary in their traits. That means they have differences in traits. Many of those are heritable, so they're passed on from one generation to the next. He also saw that a population can produce a lot more offspring than can survive to produce their own offspring. That means that some things die before they can reproduce. This makes competition occur. And he also noted that species are usually suited to their environments. That is, it's amazing. You look at organisms, I don't know, a squirrel, and it's really good at climbing trees where it lives. It's amazing that that happens, that squirrels happen to be good at climbing the place that they happen to live. They are adapted to their circumstances and adapted to their environment. So Darwin looked at these observations, noting that sometimes usually the individuals with traits that are better suited to the local environment, that is, those traits that allow their offspring to get more nutrients, or allow them to get more nutrients so they can breed more often, so they have more offspring, tend to get passed down in higher numbers than traits that are detrimental, that slow you down. Over many generations, more and more individuals will have the advantageous trait. And specifically, he looked at finches, which is what you see in the screen in front of you. These finches on the Galapagos Islands have distinct beak shapes. Some of them have a very, very large beak. That large beak is used for cracking nuts. Because on the island that those birds live, nuts are the predominant form of nutrients. They can crack nuts and get them. And by getting those nutrients, their offspring survive. Other ones of these are good for cutting leaves, tool using. Surprisingly enough, some birds use tools. I think it's the one in the number 3, the one in the bottom left corner, uses a twig, so its beak is small enough to hold and maneuver a twig in order to pull insects out of a log. Number 3 of insects in a log. Number 4 has a very thin, sharp beak. It's terrible at cracking nuts. Luckily, the island it lives on has no nuts, but plenty of trees that have insects living in them. So it uses that really thin beak in order to pull insects out of logs. These traits were passed on within the island. They went to large They had, how can I put this? They were passed on in large numbers on the same island. So the island that had a lot of nuts happened to now have a lot of birds that have large beaks because large beaks were selected for. Only the ones with large beaks were able to have offspring. On a different island, in different circumstances, you have ones with small beaks because the large beaked ones don't help you get insects and there are no nuts to eat on the ground. So the small beaked one had an advantage. Evolution and natural selection are only sort of one part of the way we look at organisms in the world. They explain how we got such variation. But here's the deal: humans are weird, and we're weird because we have a compulsion to classify things. We can't just look at the natural world and say that's really cool. All of these things exist and are doing their own thing independently. No, 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 no. Humans have to classify. Um, we group diverse items according to the similarities and relationships. And you see this personally when you open up like a bag of Skittles or a bag of M&Ms. Because if you're like most people, you have a bag of M&Ms in front of you, um, you start sorting them by color. I don't know, you're bored. Whatever. You sort things out by color. And then you might eat one color at a time or one of each color, however you want to do it. But the big thing is you've automatically sorted them. And how did you sort them? You sorted them, in this case, by color. You sort people all the time. If you were in high school, you were a master of sorting people. You looked at people, you're like, these were the drama kids. These were the athletic kids. These were like, I don't know, the stoner kids, whatever. You could look at somebody and put them into a classification group. And I guarantee just about every one of you listening to this is thinking to yourself, yes, I can do that. I can recognize them, but I'm different. I fit into lots of different groups. Well, guess what? Everybody looking at you could also classify you. It may not have matched your classification. It may have been entirely different from where you would have put yourself or where some other person would have put you, but you still did it. And people did it to you because humans cannot stop classifying things. So let's talk about how we systematically classify organisms in biology. First thing we do is we figure out what domain are these organisms in. We have three broad domains, uh, sort of big classification groups. We have domain bacteria, domain archaea, and domain eukarya. They're all connected by this point at the bottom called LUCA, which is the last universal common ancestor. Domain bacteria, domain archaea are called the prokaryotes. These prokaryotes have no membrane-bound components inside of them, and they're relatively simple. And I say that knowing that in Bio 102, I can tell you how complex they are. So you've got archaeans and bacteria fall into this prokaryotic group. They're single-celled and they're microscopic. And then you've got the eukaryotes, eukarya. Eukarya are a domain that include multicellular eukaryotic organisms as well as unicellular eukaryotic organisms. Those organisms that have compartmentalization, they have a nucleus. And these are the ones that you see all around you all the time, from trees to shark. You don't see sharks around you all the time, but I don't know, your dog, all of these are eukaryotes, as well as any microorganism that contains a nucleus. So there you have it, the basics of evolution. We will cover a lot more about evolution in Bio 102, but it's the primary theme that ties together all of biology, and it results from small changes and genetic sequences accumulating over time. Darwin had first put forward the idea of descent with modification. So he noticed that there weren't enough resources for every organism born to to survive, to reproduce, and that some organisms have beneficial adaptations that are heritable that they can pass on to their offspring. And over time, these beneficial traits built up, and harmful traits were sort of weeded out of the population just by means of that thing couldn't reproduce. Over time, this led to the vast diversity of life we see today, but it also led to a unity of life. Those organisms that are out there now that have a common ancestor all have this unity of structure, showing the same structures as their cousin organisms. And then we ended up this mini lecture with a discussion about the human need to classify things, and how we can divide all of life into three broad categories: archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Both bacteria and archaea are unicellular and prokaryotic, so they lack cell compartmentalization in a nucleus. Eukarya are eukaryotic, they have a nucleus, and those can be either unicellular or multicellular, but they all have a nucleus. And thus, we've returned to the content review questions to help focus your study and pick out what's important in this lecture. In the next lecture, we'll be covering the scientific methods. So we'll look at the process by which we acquire new information in science, because there is a process, and it's rigidly followed and iterative. So it's going to repeat back on itself and constantly improve the quality of the information we have about the world, as well as self-correcting. It will if we follow it, it should be able to adjust our viewpoints of the world to most accurately reflect what new data is showing in real time. See you soon.